right, Emma, are you ready?
I'm ready when you are. Do you want me to start or?
Yeah, you start.
Okay. Hi, my name is Emma, and I am here with Nora and Bree from Istrico Productions, and we're here to talk with Nora about her experience with the Two Sides project and her work as an editor.
If you haven't listened to last week's episode, definitely tune in to that one first. Nora and I got to sit down with Margot Carlson Delogne, and we talked to her about her project, the Two Sides Project. We go into depth about the concept of the Two Sides Project and what it means to be a storyteller. And today, we get to talk to Nora about her storytelling process, her editing process, as well as her scripting process as she takes hundreds of hours of footage and made it into a 1-hour PBS documentary.
Nora, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Bree and Emma.
So, you had this awesome project handed to you. Where did you start with all of this footage?
It's a big question. Where did I begin? Well, first, I began a few months before I was handed the footage. We basically said we don't want it to be just like a travelogue of just, following people around the country. We want to tell a bigger story here. When everybody was in Vietnam and I was here, I just started furiously researching because that was the only thing I kind of knew to do in the meantime. I started furiously researching the Vietnam War, trying to remember everything I had learned in school, realizing I barely paid attention, just kind of diving into all aspects of the Vietnam War because I was like, oh wow, this is heavy. This is a lot. I don't know if I'll even be able to tell this story. And then when they came back and handed me the footage, the first thing I did was, just as anyone should do, is just watch everything. I watched everything 2 or 3 times. I think for the first month that I had the footage, I didn't even, make a single cut. I wanted to just know what I had to work with. And once I started watching through all the interviews and all the footage and everything that was captured, I soon realized that while context, yes, is very important, the Vietnam War itself, this is a part of the story that hadn't been told yet. And really, it was a personal story. And that's when I realized that I did know how to tell this story.
Well, I think that's an important point, is that people don't realize that you're watching the same footage over and over again. You're learning everyone's expressions and their moments, and you're trying to relate to and then find people's actual emotional journey. So you're getting really close to these people.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. When I first got all the footage, honestly, I felt lost. I felt insecure about my skills. I felt like I didn't know where to start. Then I had an aha moment in watching one of Margot's interviews. She says, when you're in the search about who's your father, what you're really asking is, who am I? And that really was like it was like a little punch to the gut, and it really stuck with me. And I realized I needed a focal point. I needed a thesis to work from. And as soon as I heard that, I realized that, yes, all the research I did was amazing and very helpful, but the story I was telling was a personal hero journey story. It was a story about a woman who was lost and who had preconceived notions, and took herself on a journey to find answers and came back knowing something new about herself and about the place that she had been. And once I realized that was the story I was telling, it was a story of the children of the war. It was a story about loss, our relationship with our parents, about coming of age, which, can happen at any time in our lives. Once I realized that those were the themes that I was dealing with, and that this was not something that had been told before, and it wasn't my job to kind of educate the viewer on the war itself, but more tell that emotional story, then I started to have more confidence in myself as an editor. So I told the story the best I knew how. And I did get very intimate with the footage. I had to. I watched it over and over and over again. A lot came up in the editing process, a lot of, archiving of, Margot found, these personal tapes of her father. Margot had never heard the tapes before, and we actually ended up digitizing them. And I listened to all of the tapes, like 100 hours of audio footage of these tapes back and forth. And by the end of the process, I felt like they were my family. I don't know how healthy that is, but I come from like a method acting background. And so I just fully immersed myself in everything I made. I made a Spotify playlist of music that inspired me and I listened to it nonstop. I did become very close with the subjects and their families. So it was a very emotionally charged 6 months or so putting together the feature length version. Yeah, it was a big undertaking and I had never done anything of that size before, but I learned a lot in the process.
Well, you're asking yourself, like, my next question is going to be like, had you ever worked on something this size before?
No, I hadn't. I had done, I guess, what we would call micro documentaries. And so I had done it on a smaller level, telling patient stories or message pieces, but I had never done it at this scale. It was amazing. It was so fun. How special to be able to have a project where you can dive in and only focus on that for months at a time. I loved it. I became a little obsessive, but I loved it.
Sounds like, I mean, you talk about the hero's journey and finding yourself in the edit, but it sounds like it was really easy to relate to the journey itself and like the parallels of her big trip to Vietnam versus editing a documentary for the first time. Like there actually is a lot of, you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations.
That's very true, and I actually never really thought of that. One of my first and most favorite books of all time, it's called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he talks about the hero journey and how in stories there's a common hero journey, like there's a whole wheel that he talks about. And, you can find it on the smaller scale with stories, or you can find it on stories like The Odyssey or Star Wars. It always starts with a central character, and they have to cross over a certain threshold of thinking. And they set off on this journey, and there's challenges along the way. There's often mentors along the way. But they always end up where they started, learning something new about themselves or seeing the world in a new way upon their return. So there's a whole structure there that I had known of through my studies and through theater and all that. As soon as that clicked for me, the whole process kind of fell into place.
I think that's amazing that you made this into such an immersive experience, really like throwing yourself into it.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the first things I learned about you, Nora, was you told me early on when I was started that you would edit with like music that would match the content. It's not necessarily music that you would use. It would at least give you an idea of like what kind of pacing you wanted to do.
I'm a person that like lives in my imagination, and I need music. I need music to like get me inspired, and I need a good piece of music no matter what kind of project I'm working on to kind of get me the right tone and get me in the mindset of the story. And so before the guys even came back from Vietnam, I had started listening and making a playlist of music that was starting to inspire me. I remember I listened to the song Time by Hans Zimmer, probably the most while editing Two Sides Project, because it has like this military patriotic feel. It swells to like this epic moment, and it's very small and personal but massive at the same time. So that song was really inspiring to me, and I listened to a lot of this artist named Tony Anderson, who actually we ended up licensing a lot of his music from one album in the actual film itself. Editing for me doesn't just happen 9 to 5, like sitting at a desk. It's like I'm always thinking. I'm always, in the world trying to immerse myself, especially for a story like this and a story on this level. Like you kind of have to, so that you're, giving it justice.
The vision of an editor is that they sit alone in a dark room, clicking away. But what people don't realize is it takes like your soul to process it. You gotta like walk away, sleep on it. Mm-hmm. You're manipulating time and space.
So true.
You have to be there understanding what the character's thinking so that it can make sense just on a basic linear level.
Oh yeah, you have to watch the same clips over and over and over and over again. So not only are you becoming very familiar with what's being said, but you're very familiar with how it's said, people's quirks, even just the looks in their eyes. It's exactly right. Love was such a big part of what went into the project. I had a deep respect. I've always had a deep respect for our military and our Gold Star families, so that I was already invested in the story before we even started filming. I already knew that I cared so much about Margot, having worked with her for a few years as a client. And as soon as I started immersing myself in the interviews and in talking to the families and the subjects, they were sending me, personal photos. I really became immersed in their lives, and Margot became like a sister to me. And there was so much love there, and I would say that was at the heart of the whole thing.
On our last episode, we asked Margot a little bit about the post-production process. Let's hear her thoughts now in this next clip.
So first of all, thank you for trusting me with the story. Were you nervous about how it was going to come together? Like I said, did you have any kind of idea of what it might look like in the end? Or
gosh, I know you guys and your skills. When I got back, I wasn't sure where we were going with all this footage. And I just remember when we got back, Anthony's like, oh, we're making a documentary. And I was like, what? Are you kidding? That's amazing. I marvel still at the huge act of love and generosity that was, because you did have a lot of footage and it took time to shape the story. I didn't know what you were going to do. I remember seeing the trailer for the first time and having a couple comments, and I was like, back off, Margot, let them do their thing. It wasn't like I didn't trust you. It was like I just, I thought, wow, this is amazing. And so, yeah, I had no idea what you were doing for that 6 months until you put me in that conference room and I started watching, and I was like, how did she do this? So it was easy to trust you guys.
That clip shocked me because it was the first I was hearing that Margot was not heavily involved in the editing process, that you weren't sending final 1, final 2, final 7.2 to the client or to the subject, I guess. Was that a conscious choice because she was so close to it? Were you, as an editor and producer, just saying I need to show you a more finished project? What was your mindset?
I don't know. I will say Anthony and Margot both put a lot of trust in me. And at first it felt like too much trust. I was like, are you sure you're not going to be over my shoulder this whole time? Even Anthony didn't ask to watch anything along the way. He trusted me and gave me the time I needed. And I'm notoriously not a very fast worker. I do get fully immersed, and I had never taken on anything of this size, and all I needed was space and time. I remember showing Anthony my first cut of the story, and I mean, there was so many tears and all that stuff, and it felt really special that they trusted me enough to let go. That was unexpected, but I'm very grateful for that time and space.
Speaking of which, just pivoting to when you first started working with Anthony, you didn't come strictly from a film background, and I know you were learning a lot of skills and adjusting to this big leap of faith. I mean, you can give a little background to how you started at Istrico. Editing a documentary itself is like learning a whole new skill. It's its own beast. But those early days, what did you enjoy most learning, and how did you learn those new skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did not have a film background, like you said. I came from the theater world and moved to DC and was working at an agency in DC. And that's where I kind of started working on video projects. A teammate of mine at the agency introduced me to Anthony, and we went on a shoot together, and the rest was history. I loved his attitude. I loved his spirit, his willingness to get anything done. From the beginning, we had a great working relationship, and that we balanced each other out, I think. So when I started with Anthony, I was just working as a producer, and I hadn't really done much filming, with a camera in my hand, and I truly hadn't done any editing before. And so I was just working as a producer, organizing everything, organizing shoots, and I would annoy Anthony so much. I would just be sitting over his shoulder, and I'd be like, wait, no, move this clip 2 seconds to the left. No, cut here. And, I had a very specific vision for the story and for timing and all that stuff. And I think I had a natural knack for it. And I remember him turning to me and saying, do you just want to learn how to do this? I was probably pissing him off so much. But that's kind of when I was like, yeah, I kind of do. I like, wanted to have a little bit more control of the story. And then the rest of it was kind of learning as I worked, playing around with the programs. And the more I got to editing, the more I just really loved it. I've never been a really good technical editor. I'm still learning. I'm not very fast. I'm not the editor to go to for all the shortcuts, but my story instincts were always there. And I think that's served me really well as an editor.
Is there anything you learned about maybe your style of editing, not just like learning about all of these other people's stories, but maybe about yourself in a more introspective?
I think what I learned the most from editing Two Sides Project as an editor is that things really do need space and time to breathe, just as I needed space and time to breathe and actually put everything together. So do the clips. I think a lot of beginning editors, and especially me in my early days, I thought like the clips had to all happen right one after the other. And I think including music and things like that and moments for footage to breathe so that the viewer can take time to ingest what they're seeing and not just present someone with a bunch of information, but like giving them the time to reflect while watching. I think that that's really important.
Just like going back to, I know you mentioned at the very beginning that you did a lot of research going into the Two Sides Project and kind of had to remind yourself more information about the Vietnam War. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process looked like?
Yeah. It was a very chaotic.
Googled
Emma.
what is Vietnam.
No, it was a very chaotic process. I felt very stressed. I felt like I was cramming for a final, but I had never taken any of the class. It's kind of sad when I think about it now. I'm like, wow, really? Like the only thing I really knew was like Apocalypse Now. I didn't really know too much about the country in its current state. I didn't know too much about the details of the war. So that was the truth of it. And then I was like, wow, okay, I only have like, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to kind of get up to speed. So I watched a ton of documentaries about the Vietnam War. I read a lot. And yeah, I tried to learn as much as I could in a short amount of time. And it was a big relief, I'll say, when they came back and I saw the footage and I realized that, we're not teaching anybody. This isn't an educational documentary. You're going to learn about experiences and the experiences and voices that haven't been heard yet and stories that hadn't been told yet, their perspectives of the aftermath of the war. So that was the focus of it. And I'm glad I did do all that research because I had context. But I realized the whole time, all along, I had the tools to tell the story that I needed to tell. I mean, I think with any story, you have to remember there is a storyteller telling the story, and they have their own wealth of experiences, personal experiences that are going to, even if they don't mean to, they're going to inform the story in some way. And my parents divorced when I was a teenager, and I had a fairly difficult relationship with my dad for a while in my life. And while I didn't lose my dad in the war, I still could understand that feeling of, and anybody can relate to that, right? If you've had any difficult relationship or any loss of any kind, you can kind of relate to that feeling, that missing gap feeling. And so I took it very personally, and I felt like that was the bigger story. And so my heart was in it. My experiences were in it. My healing was in it. I healed a lot through the process of telling the story.
So, I mean, that's just the importance of there's people on camera and it's someone else's story, but the storyteller, it's impossible for them to be truly invisible. They are bringing themselves to it. So that's an important question to ask yourself when you're embarking on a story, when you're gathering a team around you to start building a story. I mean, I think that's like a really poignant aspect of documentary making and editing in general.
Yeah, I hope if people watch the Two Sides Project, they feel my heart on screen as much as the subjects. It was a vulnerable process on my end as well, and everything that went into it, from the music to my choices, I mean, my heart's out there too. I hope that came across. I hope the love came across. It was one of those projects that, like, all the stars aligned. And I don't mean this in a super cheesy way, but it really just felt like we were all meant to tell this story. And a lot of people ask, like, what's the next documentary? What's the next this? And, you know, it would have to be something truly special that my heart was completely in it, like this one. I mean, you have to be passionate, not just about the topic, but the people involved. And it was a rare, special opportunity.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us, Nora, and walking us through this amazing project.
Thank you both so much for having me.
And for those who do want to watch it, pbs.org, just search for the Two Sides Project #2, and that will bring you right to Nora's final edit. You can also hear more about the Two Sides Project by visiting twosidesproject2.com. Nora, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of The Streak. Again, this is a great episode to listen to after listening to the episode we did last time with Margot. And stay tuned the rest of the season. We still have plenty more exciting clients, projects, and ideas to talk about on The Streak.